Good evening, everyone. Sorry about that. Just a little bit of technical issues to get us started on this evening. It's great to have you on tonight, and I welcome you to MLA's Productivity and Profitability webinar. These webinars are a series of webinars to deliver topics pertinent to beef, sheep and goat producers. My name's Hilary and I work for the Webinar Coordinators Home Circuit. Tonight we are changing things up a little bit by bringing to you your one-stop winter cleaning agronomy panel. On the panel we are joined by Jim Virgona and Tim Prance, and we're also joined by Sandy McEachern, who will be directing the questions this evening. So just to run through a little bit of housekeeping to start with, this control panel will be at the top right-hand corner of your screen. The red arrow on the control panel on the left collapses and reinstates the control panel. You should be able to hear us, but we cannot hear you. Please type the questions in the box provided and please make them as succinct as possible, and we'll relay them to the panelists throughout the session. So just to introduce to you the two panelists who will be answering all your hot questions this evening. We have Jim Virgona, who's been involved with pasture agronomy for the last 25 years, working with New South Wales DPI as an academic at CSU and now as an independent consultant in his own business, Graminus Consulting. Graminus Consulting covers the New South Wales Riverina, Southwest Slopes and beyond. We also have Tim Prance, who is one of the most experienced pasture experts in our industry. Tim has 40 years experience in farm consulting in pasture production and management and pasture utilisation in grazing animals across South Australia, Vic and Tasmania. Tim has delivered grazing and pasture-based courses to over 700 landowners since 1995 and has managed a range of pasture-based research projects. Both Tim and Jim's unique ability to convert robust science into practical farm management recommendations make them the best people to sit on the panel for tonight's webinar. All right, Sandy, I'll hand over to you.
Hello.
Are you right there, Sandy? Can you hear Sandy, Jim?
No.
No. All right, that's fine. What I might do, Sandy, I have sent you a panelist link to jump on the webinar if you want to just jump off and or you might be right there. No, I might just throw to you, Jim. Sorry to cut it short. Are you right to go?
Yeah, look, I've got some slides and we can talk about them and then Sandy can get us back on track.
Yeah, okay. So you should have a little screen jumping on. Opening up.
Yeah, it says show my screen. I think I'll click that.
Yep.
And how about I go to my first slide? That would even be handier. And then I go to this thing, do I?
Yep.
Right.
Yep, good to go.
Hang on a second. Yeah, cool. There's all crap on this side of my screen. How do I get rid of that crap? You know, all the... Oh, dear, oh dear. All right. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks, Hilary, for inviting us to talk tonight, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Tim has to say as well. But I do look through the list of attendees, and I can assure you I'm somewhat humbled by some of the people listening who could be very, very useful in my spot. But nevertheless, we press on anyway. And all I was going to do was, Sandy asked us to address a few questions that have come up as part of the presentation he gave a couple of weeks ago, and that's why we're here. And so, but I was going to do two things. I was going to address some of those questions, well, three things, bring up a few other points, and then in our business, we got our hands on all of the old weed demonstration unit trial data or trial write-ups, and they're a constant source of information for us. And so I'll be sharing some of those results with you because they help to answer some of the questions that were raised in the previous webinar. Let's see what I wrote first though. Oh, that's not going anywhere. Okay, next one. Oh, hang on. I've got to go back. I'm using a weirdo. I'm using a bit of a weirdo. Oh, here we go, down here. Cool. Oh, yes. And one of the things Sandy asked me to do was to, Hillary, can you tell me, can you see all that webinar crap on your screen from
No.
on my screen?
No, we can just see your slides, Jim. So if you just want to minimize that panel at the top right hand.
And I've just got rid of the webinar. Don't worry, I've just got rid of the webinar crap. That's great. So the cost, I rang some locals. Sorry? I rang some locals tonight and found out these following costs. Gramoxone, a paraquat 250 is $110 a drum or $5.50 a litre. Simazine is $135 for a 15 kilo bag. So that's $9 a kilo. 800 gram type rate would cost you $7.20. My little spy told me that he was not sure how much MCPA would cost, but he said somewhere between $230 and $270 a drum. That's the MCPA 750. A 700 mil application at $250 a drum would be worth $8.75. Contract rates vary. The highest I've heard of, and some of you out there might know better, but the highest I've heard of is $24 a hectare, prompting my client to buy his own spray unit. But commonly, you know, I'm charged $14. A lot of my clients are charged about $14 for contract spraying. So when we're going through some of these spray mixes a bit later on, you'll be able to, you know, put some, Sandy asked that we put some costs on this stuff, so that can be the sort of bedrock information. If you have other information, text it in. I'd be most interested to hear. Here we go. The context to the cleaning is, and what we're trying to achieve here is very important. So you know, and it ranges from people just wanting a paddock to look a lot better. And Sandy related to you in the last talk the importance of the changes in quality that occur with cleaning and their impact in particular on lamb growth. That's something that my clients report on. You could also be cleaning for better performance of the paddock through time. So if we're getting rid of grasses that aren't particularly useful and that competitively inhibit clover, then we can expect, if we expect more clover, we can always expect more nitrogen flowing through our system and growing more feed overall. Remembering that benchmark 20 kilos of nitrogen per tonne of legume growth. We can also view the cleaning as a longer term cleanup before an eventual planting to perennial grass, something that I often favour. So we can get a really good, you know, 2 years before you go into the perennial grass pasture. One idea is to give the whole system a really good clean in the winter, then have the next year as a legume dominant year, fixing lots of nitrogen available to your new pasture the year after. Just something that we think about. But using herbicides and winter cleaning without thinking why is the problem, I think. So people just do it, or the local agronomist at the store who wants to sell you some herbicide or stuff like that just says, yeah, mate, you got silvergrass, let's get rid of the silvergrass. But if you're not asking yourself, why is it there? What is going to be the prospect of it coming back again? Then you're sort of just addressing a symptom without thinking about the cause or thinking about the system that you want to be implementing. And I think that's one of the problems that comes in this sort of area. This is not, we shouldn't be thinking about this as a lot of cropping agronomists would, as this situation for this year. We really have to be thinking of why has this arisen and what the hell are we going to do about it in the long term anyway. Enough preaching. And I say that showing you the data from Dowling's paper. I just want to go over this one again because, well, maybe I don't. No, I've given you the, this is the wrong one. I'll get that a bit by the end of the night. I'll get the right one. I've copied the wrong file over. But in that work, I want to just forget about the slide in front of you. I'll just tell you about it because it was actually when I became a young research agronomist. This is the first trial I ever saw, and this trial was the one that Sandy talked about, where they sowed 3 rates of subclover at high and low rates of Vulpia as well. And a 4th treatment was they sowed subclover and annual ryegrass. Well, the only impact on the Vulpia, on the silvergrass Vulpia, whatever you want to call it, population, was actually the ryegrass treatment. It's the only one, and particularly and importantly, I think, particularly where there was a lower. They sowed the silvergrass in this experiment, which was quite complex, but at 2 different rates. But at the lower rate, the ryegrass was able to keep the silvergrass at bay. So that goes back to my previous comment. What are you trying to achieve? Unless there's a competitor in there, then all you're doing is having a seasonal effect, maybe a 2-year effect, but pretty soon after that, we're back to silvergrass again, or whatever problem weed you want to be thinking about. So I'm sorry about the wrong slide there. I was in a bit of a hurry up. And look at that. That'd be lots of, I've got to go back again. I still don't know how to do this. That'll be lots of Vulpia, yes. The other thing is I spoke to a few clients about this, and I soon realized that unlike crop agronomy, we often need to check ourselves when we're speaking about these issues to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. So with one client, he was talking about how ridiculous it was to bother cleaning some of these things. And then, you know, we sort of argy-bargied each other a bit. And then I finally realized that he was talking about a small infestation and I was talking about a major disaster. And so we're talking about 2 entirely different things. And I raise this point because we don't have the sort of, we just got to make sure of what each other's talking about when we're addressing these problems. You know, crop agronomists can talk about the crop stage, leaf 5, you know, Z31, blah blah, tiller density, a whole lot of stuff. But we tend to use things like, oh, there's lots of Vulpia, or the Phalaris is a bit patchy, and whatever, you know. And indeed, I'm still not sure, as this slide says, when a Phalaris pasture is actually buggered. But I guess I know it when I see it, but I still don't know that there are published reliable thresholds. So most of us are making fairly subjective judgments. Nonetheless, that's all we've got to go with. But description-wise, just make sure you're on the same page as as whoever's advising you or whoever you're advising when you're talking about these problems, because it is a major hassle. The other thing I like to talk about is opportunity costs, just a brief one. And so often we say, oh my goodness, you know, you're going to spray this pasture with simazine and paraquat and MCPA right in the middle of winter. You're going to kill winter production. It's going to be terrible. Well, that's true for that paddock, and often that can be a real problem. In terms of the opportunity cost, that is the winter production foregone, right? So what are the costs? The costs are application, and the cost also is the fact that I don't have that feed there and I really, really need it. That's fair enough. But what if you don't really, really need it? And sometimes the situation is such that if you like, conditions conspire in such a way as you might be a bit understocked, or you might be having a great autumn. I hope you are. We are, that's for sure. You might have had a great autumn. You might be going into winter with much more feed than your median year, with no feed gap in prospect. Then there's no other opportunity, if you like. I mean, you're not losing anything because you got feed coming out your ears, so to speak. In that case, the cost of the cleanup is simply the herbicide and the application cost. The value of that feed that you're foregoing is nothing, because it doesn't matter because you've got heaps of it. Now, I was taught this by producers actually, who went to town on a few pastures in one particular year because they looked at their situation, they sort of knew how much soil water they had, and they just thought, this is fantastic. We've got 500 kilos more than we normally have. Off we go. And they cleaned up a whole lot of pastures. So I think that just prompts us to think a little bit more tactically rather than in terms of routine. We're going to do this and we're going to do that. Every so often, if the situation presents itself, then the costs of doing some of the things that we're talking about can be reduced quite markedly. Is this okay, Hillary? We okay so far? Hello?
Yep, great, Jim. Are you
Cool. I just want to know that I'm being heard or something. It's
loud
sort of,
and
this
clear?
is like COVID-19 webinar. It's a shocker. Anyway, here we go. Good. So hence in some years provide greater opportunities than others, and we've got to be sensible. I mean, honestly, the last few years we have just been often, not always, but more saying no to cleaning and like type activities because of seasonal conditions. So it goes both ways. Questions from the previous session. Now, I don't know how you want to do this, Hillary, but I'll address these, and then we'll throw to Tim and he can address them too. And I don't know how we go with this, but I just wrote these. Sandy sent us these, and he said, he asked, what are your recommendations for winter cleaning to remove annual grasses from a perennial grass pasture, independent of over sowing or a pasture renovation strategy? Okay. So have you used it? Yes, mostly for silvergrass control, but also barley grass. What weed species? I just said that. And with what chemicals? Generally, the chemicals we would be using when we're talking about a perennial grass pasture would be simazine and gramoxone. I have noted with some of my clients at times, they like to use group A herbicides on phalaris, and it all ends in tears. So don't do that. It doesn't work. And of course, there's going to be one of you in the laws of statistics who said, oh, it works for me. Well, good on you. But basically, I've seen it destroy pastures, and there's a bit of published data on it as well. And so we don't do it. If you haven't used it, well, we do, so that doesn't matter. Okay, next one. When would you use oversowing and how would you implement it? Well, control. Well, how would I implement it? I'd control silvergrass in the previous year if that's what we were looking at, and sow ryegrass in the following autumn. Which ryegrass is a can of worms to me. And interestingly, if you look at the ridiculous amount of information and varieties of ryegrass, you get all this sort of stuff on growth, but you rarely find out anything about longevity. That is, seed characteristics, etc. Sometimes you'll find stuff on seasonality. So what's most interesting to me in a ryegrass isn't that it'll grow 10% more than the next ryegrass, but in that it will seed down and it will persist in the pasture. I'm more interested in that information. I rarely can get my hands on it. Having some of my growers this year have just got their hands on Lolium rigidum, annual ryegrass, and they're sowing that, some in paddocks that have had no prep and some in paddocks that have been simazined and gramoxone the year before. What would you allow for oversowing costs? I don't know, guys. Honestly, depends on how you do it yourself. Contractors vary. I know. I know a few contractors who are around $60 a hectare, but I know it goes a lot higher depending on where you are in the world. And then you've got your seed costs ahead of that. If you're having an ongoing fertilizer program with phosphorus, I probably wouldn't bother with anything else. I just jam it in. How long does it take for the sowing grass to establish? Well, just a few months. You're not going to treat this pasture like a new phalaris pasture or anything like that. Ryegrass germinates every year in pastures, and so we don't have to be too precious with it. What would you expect the longer term benefits to be from this? Oh, well, it's cheaper than it. I look at this as just sort of like your halfway reno. Like it's cheaper than your total renovation because of all of those lost production costs, as well as the extreme expense of the new pasture, the lots of herbicide. You've got herbicide, a few herbicides. You've got, phalaris at the moment. I've got clients paying $24 a kilo, all of that sort of stuff. So you're avoiding all of that sort of thing. The benefits, well, I think the benefit should be we should see the benefits in terms of pasture composition and quality. if silvergrass is having a negative impact on clover production, then replacing it with ryegrass can improve things in that direction as well. So, but the key thing is that we keep the desirable species still in the pasture for a while, so it can pay for the price of that upgrade. Otherwise, it's just window dressing. In your opinion, questions from last minute, in your opinion, if the pasture requires winter cleaning to boost productivity, can it be saved? Well, it's the length of string type question. It just depends on the status of that pasture, and I admit to being entirely subjective about that. It's such a hard thing to judge when you. I'll give you an idea. I mean, we could talk about phalaris densities and say, oh, you know, once a phalaris cover's got less than 30, basal cover of less than 30% or something like that. But you all know from looking at paddocks, you know that there'll be areas with no phalaris and areas with half good phalaris, and then there'll be areas in between, and you'll be thinking, what the hell, you know? Where are we at with this one? So I think it's a very difficult question, and I think it's one that basically research has sidestepped, which is a real shame for us. But so it depends on your starting point to answer that question. I think it's worth a go. If there's a bit of phalaris in there that you'd like to keep for a bit longer, then we know the nature of that pasture is to have big gaps or to have gaps between the perennial species, and the size of those gaps, I guess, is obviously a function of density. But then, you know, something is going. I mean, we would like those gaps to be filled with subclover. That would be pretty, but we all know that that is a fairly unlikely and fairly unstable situation. So those gaps are going to be inhabited by other species eventually. We've all learnt that lesson. So my thought would be, I would give it a go as the phalaris was thinning. That's all I can say to you. And it could be a stopgap measure. You might say, well, you know, this paddock is really crap. I can't resow it now, but within my plan would be to get round to it in 5 years, where you could jam this sort of approach in before that if you wanted. Yes. Technical questions. There's a whole lot of technical questions, and this is just my run on them. Tim will give a run, I'm sure, I hope. My run would be this. What is the trigger to get all the Vulpia emerged so that you know winter cleaning for Vulpia is going to be effective? I don't know, wait till midwinter or maybe late June in southern New South Wales, if you're not sure. Generally, if you clean then, there's not a hell of a lot of germination after, from what I've seen. If you've still got Vulpia there after, it's because the job has not been 100% effective, would be my take on it, more than you've had this another huge flush of germination. I note with interest too, along sort of backing that up, is in a lot of situations, we'll just spray out once the year before, in the spring before we, that is before in the next autumn, we put a phalaris pasture in, and often that is enough in terms of weed control. So I don't think the Vulpia seed bank is particularly long-lived. I'm happy to be corrected on that by any of our listeners or my fellow presenters. Does winter cleaning control other annual grasses? The answer is yes. Some of the data I'll show you in a moment, but for barley grass, if you want, you've got to up the paraquat rate. It's not true that simazine doesn't do a job on barley grass. It does, but you have to up the rate a bit, particularly of the paraquat, to get it. I'll show you some of that later, hopefully, if I'm allowed to. How long after winter cleaning can you sow annual perennial ryegrass? I'm going to leave the perennial ryegrass one to Tim. For annual ryegrass, we'd be sowing the next year. You wouldn't be sowing that year. So I'll leave that one for you, Tim. I'll shut up. I'll shut up in just a moment, mate. Are you right?
Yeah, ready. Yeah. Can I hop in, can I?
Yeah, if you want, buddy.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. No, you've covered that pretty well. I completely agree with you in relation to grass selective herbicides. I'm not that keen on them. I think they take out too much winter feed to start with. They do knock the perennials around, and if you've got a silvergrass problem, a number of cases where barley grass has been removed and they've been left with a huge stand of silvergrass. So I would. So I'm not a winter cleaning person, with the exception of simazine. I think I've had really great experience with simazine on silvergrass, but mainly on lighter textured soils with probably, not huge amounts of organic matter in the surface, because simazine's totally non-selective. So the only way that it's working is by killing the roots of the silvergrass rather than the roots of the clover. So you've got to get it when the silvergrass is really, before it's got probably 3 or 4 leaves on it, and when the clover has, 3 or 4 leaves. So you're just working on the base of the silvergrass is shallow rooted, and the subclover's got longer roots. So, if you're going to put simazine out in July, it's far too late. I'd rather see it in the first 6 weeks of the season. And then I've seen excellent results, and it tends to knock off all the silvergrass as it comes up during winter, because the issue with silvergrass has got a very staggered germination. I don't think it's got any hard seeds at all. It's just got a very staggered germination. I've got actually one of my clients is listening, and he had an agronomist that told him to put some gramoxone with simazine, I think last year or the year before, and there was the paddock just grew nothing during winter. It was just completely bare. Like, it was quite good in spring, but it buggered it for winter grazing. So I don't like adding gramoxone to simazine. But I guess I'm lucky that most of my clients have got either sandy or sandy loam soils, and simazine works really well in early June. That's for silvergrass. What I've got, can I just put these slides on, Hillary? Is that one there? Can you see that one?
Not yet.
Hang on.
Jim, we'll just finish off with Jim's questions first, and then we can duck to you if that's all right.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to take the slide off, or?
No, I can't see
okay.
it. So, you're right. I'll do that. Just when Jim finishes. Yeah.
You want me just to keep talking a bit more?
We'll just flip back to Jim, and then we'll continue. All right. You. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, you're right. I'm happy either way.
Yep, keep going, Jim.
Yeah, I'm also happy because I'm drinking. I'm also happy because I'm drinking wine now.
I've got a few points I'd want to make, but I can wait for Jim to say his bit and then come in.
Well, just pop in, Tim, when you want to say something. That might be the best way. Next question is, does urea applications reduce Vulpia percentage? To tell you the truth, I probably wouldn't ever recommend urea on a really big Vulpia pasture. I just go, probably spend your money in better ways. Vulpia is very good at using nitrogen, and yes, I'm still guilty that I never published that data. So I can't see really why so it's fairly effective at using it. So I can't see why necessarily, unless the competitors were better at using it, that it would actually tip the balance that much. So I have to say, though, I have to think the one time that I've done a bit of that work, it did look like it, but we put on ridiculous amounts of nitrogen. I don't think with your 100 kilos of urea type thing, I wouldn't expect a huge tip in the balance. Is it common that winter cleaning and spray topping used independently of each other? Yes, just shifts the balance from Vulpia to barley grass and back again. Killing Vulpia with winter cleaning allows the barley grass in. Killing barley grass with spray topping lets the Vulpia in. Well, I guess that's true, and that's why I say it's rather futile unless there's some other management intervention to make it to put the pasture, if you like, on another trajectory altogether. I think that should be our main aim, really. So I'm now going to do something a little bit different. So I'm going to draw into some old trial work done in the 80s and 90s. Yes, in New South Wales by the Weed Demonstration Unit at Orange. And this isn't the sort of science that gets published in Nature. But to me, it's really valuable information. I just love it. And we can go arguing about it all you like, but this is just what the bloke did. The fellow usually is Barney Milne. And these were the results that he got. Okay, so we'll just, but I'm putting it here there mainly to prompt a bit of thought about some of the stuff that we've been talking about. But first, a disclaimer: these are not recommendations, of course. Only the label can dictate what you're allowed to do legally, and you are responsible for what gets sprayed. So don't say Jim Virgona said I could. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying this is what the weed demonstration unit did. Please read the label. That's all I can say. Here's a trial on late control of silvergrass in a paddock where there's very poor control of a previous attempt to control silvergrass on the 16th of August in 93. Only 65% of it was controlled. So they decided, let's do another trial late in the season. Let's put down a few chemical combinations by the 20th of September. 93 was a pretty good year too, by the way. And the little graphics there, you've got a sub and silvergrass, the stages. Now, I want you to imagine that the one on the right, the silvergrass, is an A4 page, because that is exactly how big the silvergrass, the biggest silvergrass was. It was the size of an A4 page. All right, so it's a reasonable size when these treatments were applied. Now, let's have a look at some of this. There's an unsprayed buffer that around the paddock, and then there was what was sprayed in August, which was it was just MCPA and simazine. So that would be MCPA 500 grams per litre. So he was given a good go, and likewise the simazine would have been 500 grams per litre as well. Right, so that's what it achieved. You can see now. Forget about the percent site mean stuff. Just look at the amount of subclover in dry matter when it was assessed on the 19th of November, and the amount of silvergrass. The rest, and maybe the subclover seed yield's fine, but don't look at the percent site mean stuff, because it doesn't actually make a lot of sense to me in trials to do that. To tell you the truth, unless you're doing sort of wheat variety trials or something. Next treatment, just gramoxone and BS 1000. A litre of that gramoxone would be 200 grams per litre product of paraquat. 1 litre, we've reduced Vulpia a fair bit, the late Vulpia. If I gramoxone simazine with BS 1000, not much more of an effect. But if I up those rates to 1 and 2.5 of simazine, oh my gosh, and some BS 1000, I've plummeted the Vulpia to just about nothing. And all of those treatments actually have had a big effect on silvergrass late in the season, without, I might say, having affected the subclover seed yield apparently. Now, if you want to get all statistical with me, I can match it with the best of them. So I understand all of that, but and I think there was some stats done on this, but I haven't shown them to you. But you could say pretty much that the late one in this case. Now, this is not something in the end that the author actually advised people do, but as a late get out of jail card, it was quite interesting. Any comments? Sorry.
Yeah. So that was done quite late. So he obviously got the winter grazing off it prior to the application of the sprays. So,
well, that is that's a great point, Tim, because that opportunity cost wasn't even there. Now, so that's really interesting. It hasn't cost him anything in terms of winter feed. Let's not just remember, I should have said there is another disclaimer. For anybody, and a lot of you producers know this, what happens in one year don't happen in the next. 2 years ago, one of my clients put down a simazine gramoxone treatment that they always used and was always partially successful. It was pretty good. In that particular year, it nuked the paddock. Only the phalaris lived, and little bits of clover, and everything else, the soft brome, the silvergrass, the ryegrass, the barleygrass, dead as a doornail. We think it interacted with a massive frost. Okay, so you get that stuff.
If I just butt in, that paddock actually had quite a bit of subclover in it. So even the buffer had 840 kilos of subclover seed So it was a good, looked like it was a good subclover-based pasture, just silvergrass. And I think that's a reasonable strategy for that sort of pasture. But as was pointed out, I think in the previous webinar, really subclovers are a really poor competitor with silvergrass. So you've got to drill something into there the following year to compete, stop your annual grasses from coming back again.
Well, that's so right, and I think I have to say that these trials were done Tim, in a sort of different era. Let's just put it that way.
Just on that, Jim.
Yeah, mate.
Or how are you nearly done? We might just put Tim on.
No, I'm happy to look. I've got a few more of these to show, but it's no big deal. If you want me to stop, that's fine, mate.
Yeah, we'll just flick over to Tim. What you'll see, Tim, is just a thing come up on your screen.
I'll show my screen.
Yep, show your screen.
Okay. Well, that's just a little trial of just different rates of winter cleaning in a barley grass pasture, and you can see, it's a really fine line between knocking everything out and knocking nothing out, and I found it quite difficult to get the right rates. They were different rates of gramoxone and glyphosate sort of early in winter to knock the grasses out and hopefully just end up with in this case, a medic pasture. But I've seen just with the grass selective herbicides, the similar things happen. You just, you get rid of the barley grass, but you've got nothing in the paddock afterwards. And if there's clover in there, that's fine, or medic, but it takes a long time to get going again. So that's that one. I'll just see if I can. But what I really like is just get rid of this thing here. I can see my arrows. What I really like is spring is taking out annual grasses in spring and just putting in a brassica crop, and then the following year you can come back and put your phalaris in, which in this case the brassica was sown in spring with perennial ryegrass. You can see the perennial ryegrass plants in there. So this was just a really silvergrass, barley grass paddock that was just was sprayed out in late August, and the brassicas were sown in early September, and this is what it looked like the following year. I'll just get, go back one. That's what it looked like the following. Well, too quick. That's what it looked like the following year. So it's just it turned from a barley grass and silvergrass paddock into just a great perennial ryegrass paddock. And I think using a barley grass is a particularly difficult one to handle in winter. So with my clients with barley grass problems, I like them just to spray the paddocks out in late winter and put a brassica crop in. And always think if we get dry summers, and if the springs are not good and the summers are not good, you don't get much of a brassica crop, but you always end up with a clean paddock. So I think the worst thing about about the brassica crop is that you end up with a clean paddock, even if you don't get a lot of grazing off the brassica. Then the following autumn you can put your perennials in. And the other thing is, I'll just say that's a strip. I don't overlook mechanical topping. That's barley grass in a paddock that was topped twice in spring, and it's been quite effective in terms of reducing barley grass seed set. If you're going to do the mechanical topping this, or even hard grazing, it pays to actually if you can spell the paddock prior to it being topped or grazed, and so all the tillers, all the barley grass tillers have actually got seeds on them or heads on them, and the heads are actually off the ground. The harder you graze barley grass, the closer to the ground the heads get, and it just makes it really hard to you can't control it with grazing then. So if you can spell it prior to grazing, then you get the heads off the ground, and then either you're grazing, you sort of crash grazing, or your topping is quite effective.
So just
we've
on
had
that,
this.
sorry, I'll
Yes,
just jump in here. Is it common that winter cleaning and spray topping are used independently of each other?
yes, yeah. The winter. As I said, I'm not a great fan of winter cleaning, and the only time I really recommend it is for just simazine on its own for silvergrass control.
Thank you.
I'm not that. I do have a couple of clients that use it for barley grass, but I'm not that keen on it. The only exception would be I have seen some reasonable results with a very early winter clean. This is, say, when the grasses are in the 3 to sort of 5 to 6 leaf stage, perhaps 3 to 4, maybe 4 weeks after the break. That you can. I have seen some good results with 300 ml of glyphosate in just to knock out the annuals in a paddock that's got a lot of clover in it, and a reasonable base of perennial ryegrass or phalaris. So I've seen that, just those really low rates of glyphosate work well if there's a good perennial base and that clover base. That timing is really critical there, and sometimes it works. And if you get a really staggered germination, it's not going to work very well because the rate of your rates of glyphosate are too low to actually get the annuals in, and you can't have them too high, otherwise you knock out your perennials. So it's
Thanks.
What's it? If you had another one, what's this other one here? Show. That one. And that you can see that area there. That's a paddock that was high. It was like a high freezing rate of glyphosate. So you can see the area that was missed. So it's a high freezing rate of glyphosate in sort of late September, and that was actually very effective in terms of silvergrass control. And the rest of the paddock was actually annual ryegrass and subclover. So it was actually quite effective there. I think that's probably all my slides, I reckon.
Did you have anything else you wanted to add to what Jim was saying, Tim?
No, I like the oversowing. With annual ryegrasses or perennial ryegrass works really well. And I agree that you've got to, once you get your annuals out of your subclover based pastures, you've really got to get an annual ryegrass or a perennial grass of some sort in there to compete with the annuals. So in oversowing the following year works really well. I certainly wouldn't oversow directly after applying simazine. Actually, we've had a couple of agronomists that have been recommending simazine pre-emergent, and I don't like that at all. It really knocks the clover around, and you can't oversow with anything then either because the simazine's still active right through winter.
Okay, so what I might do is flick back to Jim to finish off his slides and just jump in wherever you think appropriate, Tim. And just while I do this, everyone, just remember to get your questions in for the panel. If you have any burning questions that you want answered, remember to type them in the box. And once Jim and Tim have finished with their slides, we'll get on to them. All right, thanks, Jim.
Yeah. Right. Next one. Look, I've just got about 3 or 4 of these experiments, and we'll just talk our way through them. But anyway, next one was broadleaf and grass control in lucerne and sub. Now, this is really interesting. This sort of stuff. I'm sorry about the slide, but anyway, it says weeds were saffron, shepherd's purse, turnip weed, barleygrass, vulpia, and ryegrass sprayed on the 4th of July, 1995. Broadleaves 6 to 10, grasses in early tillering. Now, I know, look at this horrible data. It's horrible, isn't it, in so many ways? But what you've got here is total control is 10. The closer you get to total control, the better. I don't care today about any of the broadleaf weeds. Couldn't give a damn about them. I'm much more interested in the annual grass, which was dominated by the annual grass other than Volpia was dominated by barley grass with some ryegrass. And once again, we're seeing a fairly large impact on the Volpia of the MCP of simazine, of course, as we'd expect. Of the other grasses, it looks like you get a much bigger effect once you've added the gramoxone. Here at 200 grams active per hectare, that's 1 litre, and 1 litre with the MCPA and simazine. So that's I hadn't really noticed. Oh yeah, no. And so that's once again that thing about a question that came up a few times last time about the other grasses to control in winter cleaning. What can we do? Well, of course, even though that was done in a loosened pasture, those mixes wouldn't affect phalaris. They'll affect short-term production, but they won't affect the phalaris in the longer term. Comments were gramoxone was great for barley grass. Probably needs rates to be around 0.75 to a litre of the 200 gram product. And I know there are a lot of agronomists who go a lot harder than that. MCPA and gramoxone say, you might have noticed on that one, is MCPA and gramoxone safe and loosened? It appeared to the author that gramoxone safe and the loosened to the impact of MCPA. But he did note that the MCPA is not registered for it. But I have to say it and like treatments with gramoxone are used routinely now to clean up loosen. I don't want to go to that one. I want to just hang on. I just no, I will go back. Yeah, no, that's all right. No, all right. This is grass and saffron in a clover pasture. So saffron thistles, barley grass 3 to 5 leaf, silvergrass 1 to 3 leaf. Unfortunately, in this one, we had a little problem with, I think, this is no dry matter assessments were done, unfortunately. You have a big impact on, again, having heavier rates of new quat reduced the barley grass population quite significantly. If you whack in the MCPA, the simazine, and the new quat, we've got getting barley grass down to 17 plants from 892 per metre squared, and silvergrass down to 0. So again, this would be quite. You can sow that, you can use that in a perennial grass pasture, which was the context in which we were asked to sort of address. So you can get away with some. It is true that you'll absolutely nuke a fair bit of winter production, but if that's what you're trying to achieve and it's possible within that particular year of your production system, then why not? Indeed, I think I'll go to the year before. I think there was one more.
Can I just chip in there?
Yeah, mate.
See, one of those treatments, like there's 17 plants per square metre of barley grass survived. So that was. So how much seed do you reckon those plants would set? My guess is. My guess is they'd probably get 500 or 600. You'd probably be back to your 400 or 500 plants per square metre the following year.
Yeah. I noticed something really interesting in a trial years ago. It's just one of those things that's stuck in my memory, and that is I had barley grass in a phalaris pasture, so it was a reasonable phalaris pasture, but it got utterly infested with barley grass. And at the turn of the season, sort of like as we got into spring, the barley grass started going up the head. The sheep didn't want to touch it, right? And as a result, I was starting to ask myself, well, where's the phalaris? You know, normally I'd expect to see my phalaris now. It was a dryish year. I think it might have been 2000. I think it might have been 2007. Anyway, I started looking, and what the sheep had been doing is, as they always do, ignoring the barley grass, but absolutely and utterly punishing the phalaris, right?
Yep.
Going into a notoriously very dry summer. So sometimes I think maybe even, Tim, the transient controls might be worth it, but I take your point totally that 17 probably ain't enough to assure a longer term control. I mean, we've gone a long way, but it's not enough. But unfortunately, he didn't do dry matters, which was a real problem with that. And they could have been 17 pathetic little things, or I don't know. So that was a real problem. I think
that just emphasises that it's just so important to have that competition in there.
Yes.
To compete with the annuals. And I mean, that trial there was lucerne. So if you haven't got lucerne, then you need phalaris, or you need.
No, that was clover. Sorry, that was just clover.
It was just clover, was it? Sorry.
Yeah. This one was equally. Now this one was okay. The year before, that's right. We have subclover 6-12 trifoliate leaves, barley and Vulpia, anywhere from 2-leaf through to fully tilled. Let's just have a look at what he did and what he found. So the nil treatment, barley and silvergrass were 15, 17 kilos per hectare of dry matter. Clover at 1680, happy days. If we put on the MCPA, the grasses went ballistic, probably because you killed a whole lot of saffron thistle, that's ST. Let's go down to our control stuff now. If you really wanted to get the grasses down, once again, you're into the heavier rates, like we said earlier, the heavier rates of the new quat, right? The heavier rates of the paraquat. That's just paraquat, that stuff at 200 grams. So it's high rates of MCPA. That's equivalent of about, that rate there is equivalent of about 700 of the new 750. The simazine is at a high rate, but well, it's not that high. It's 500 grams per hectare. And then the new quats at 200 grams per hectare of product, right? And we're getting down to almost nothing. So can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm getting some feedback from people. I'm getting some feedback for some people on texts that I'm coming in and out. I do apologise. So all I'm saying is there are, this was mainly to address that. Many of us would be very familiar and comfortable with what simazine can do. That's fine. But the question kept on getting asked about other grasses. So that's why I've whacked a lot of this other stuff in there. And yes, there is, if you like, nuking of winter production. But again, I just go back to my other comments. Some years, totally unacceptable. Other years, tactically, could give it a spin. I think, honestly, I'd rather just leave it there if that's all right. What was the last one? No, I'll leave it there. Thanks, Hillary.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Tim. That's what happens when you give the presenters all the questions beforehand. Thanks for that, guys. I do have a few coming through, and we'll get onto them right away. Sandy, you're not there, are you? You haven't? No, Sandy's having technical difficulties this evening.
I reckon Sandy's just dumped. Look, Hillary, that's crap. Sandy's just dumped us in it. Let's face facts.
Yes, lucky we have some experienced presenters.
He's sitting in front of the telly drinking wine.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He's having
someone just wrote in, Sandy's asleep.
Yeah, he's having COVID time. Anyway, good luck to him.
The first question I'll direct to you, Tim, from DJ. Can you use spray topping to control barley grass in a ryegrass clover pasture with limited seed set problems for rye and clover?
Yeah, it really depends on the maturity of the ryegrass. And to start with, if you're going to go down that track, then you'd have to use gramoxone. Like glyphosate knocks the clover seed set around too much. So but gramoxone can work well. I've seen really good results but you have to do 2 sprays of gramoxone. Often you've got to do 2 sprays of gramoxone at about 3/4 of the 250, 3/4 of a litre each spray. So that can work quite well, but you've got to, you've really, the thing with barley grass is you've got to, if it's got such a staggered head emergence that often it greens up after the first spray, so you've got to come back and give it another go. So if you're prepared to do that, I've seen that work quite well.
Thanks, Tim. Do you have anything to add, Jim? Or
yeah, I just trying to find a paper. There's a paper it was done on late sprays of gramoxone on subclover at Rutherglen. I was just, if you can remove my screen for a second, put it somewhere else. Thanks,
Yep.
Hillary.
We'll put it
I'll
on
just go and
your
nick it, but it backs
photo.
up what Tim was saying basically, that you would be using gramoxone and you could be pretty safe on the clover. I think anywhere where you had a grass, particularly phalaris, but Roundup to me is just out of the question. There you go. Just
the only other thing, we did have an instance, we had a local instance here where a guy knocked out a stand of phalaris in the first year with a spray topping with gramoxone, but that's just because the phalaris was only, it had only just 1 year old, and it didn't have enough dormant buds, and because it's what they call synchronous, Jim would know more about this than me, I think they call it synchronous flowering. It had all the heads had all come up at the one time, all the buds had come up at the one time, and they got knocked off by the gramoxone.
Goodness.
It was just because it was a new stand and didn't have any dormant buds.
So just another.
Well, that's.
Oh, sorry, Jim.
No, you're right. No, you're right, Hillary. Keep going, mate.
I was just on that. Someone's also written through. Andrew said, "What about low rates of glyphosate in the same scenario? So taking barley grass out of clover ryegrass pasture."
I don't like, this is in spring. I don't like it. If you want to keep your clover, I think I'm not keen on it. It's like Jim was saying, it's horses for courses. If your pasture in spring has got bugger all clover in it, then fine. You go and use glyphosate because it's and I've seen quite good results in spring even with relatively high, like a nuking of glyphosate, litre and a half or 2 litres, or litre and a half anyway, can be quite effective. Because just to get around that staggered emergence of grasses. But I come back to what I said before. I reckon the best results I've seen is just come a little bit earlier. Make use of your grasses in winter, and use your 2 litres of glyphosate in September or late August, and put a brassica crop in, and at the very least you'll end up with a clean paddock. And the brassicas are pretty cheap.
Okay, hot tip there. Jim, this one's for you. Excuse me if you've already answered it. I'm not good with my chemical names. Will spray seed kill barley grass 4 weeks after the break, and can you then sow annual rye prior to winter?
Yes.
Yes for the first one, and yes for the second. I see no reason.
Yes,
yes, and yes.
Yes. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah, no problems there at all.
Okay, just keep sending.
That's a good option.
So Paul would like to know, are you both saying that oversowing with annual ryegrass is the cheapest and best way to go into a degraded pasture? Jim, you first.
Oh, I'd say. Let me think here. Hang on. It's my phone's just telling me to have my nightly medicine.
That's okay. While you think about that.
Hang on. So look, I will address it. I'll just say that it's a good option. I don't think it's the only option, and we really need, once again, to. I'm not knocking the question, but I'm just saying, what do we mean by degraded pasture? Do we mean something that's, so we need to say, oh, well, is it degraded from being really good phalaris to not so good, or is it just filthy with silvergrass? Or I'm sort of not quite sure. But so all we're saying, I think we're saying with the ryegrass sort of idea is that it's just the next step that you need to take. Otherwise, you're on the treadmill of running around with herbicide every few years, or not bothering, So, going down the path of having just, poorly digestible grass dominant pastures, or running around all the time with a spray cart. So somewhere along the line here, we've got to do something a bit better. I'm not saying it's the only thing to do. I'm sure amongst the wise heads out there, there are lots of different ideas, but it's the one that I'm championing because it ticks a few boxes in terms of cost and in terms of probable effectiveness against the silvergrass.
Yeah, I would say if there's silvergrass in there, I'll never recommend anyone sowing your ryegrass into a silvergrass pasture. It's just hopeless. If the paddock's been spray topped the previous year, that is a different story. But if there's already silvergrass in there, I'm afraid the oversowing is not very effective. When ryegrass is a very good competitor, but it's just not good enough to compete with silvergrass.
Great, thanks guys. Just a cheeky one again from Neil about the spray seed with the barley grass and then sowing in annual rye. What rate if you're wanting to recommend something? Otherwise, we could say contact your local advisor.
Yeah, that's right. Follow the label, but it'd be around the 2 to 3 litres per hectare of spray seed. But yeah, you want to read the label.
I'm not really sure whether I might get just as good a result with gramoxone, really. To tell you the truth.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah. That's true. If there's
and
no other problem. Yeah.
And it'd be probably easier on the clover and cheaper. I'm not sure I'd use spray. I don't try not to use spray. Spray seed is really expensive, you know. So anyway, that's just me. Yeah,
that's a good point, Jim. I'd agree with that.
So the next one from Colin, I think you'll both want to answer this. So Tim, if you go first, does MCPA enhance the activity of simazine and gramoxone against annual ryegrasses? Your data seem to say yes. So sorry, that might be you, Jim.
Can I just have the question? Can I have the question again? Does MCPA
enhance the activity of simazine and gramoxone against annual grasses?
I think the answer to that is don't read too much into that data around some of the errors. I don't think it does, actually.
Yeah.
I don't think it does at all. There's an extent to which simazine enhances the MCPA on some of the broadleaf weeds, right? And then there's a funny little interaction between paraquat and gramoxone and MCPA, but I don't. I don't think the MCPA is doing that. Right? I understand if you look at the data, and I actually don't have that data in front of me. I don't know what's happened to my screen. It's gone all weirdo. Oh, here it is. That he's referring to, but I just would think that the answer is no, and you'd have to look at the stats behind the data, but I don't think that would, even if it occurred in 1 year, I don't think that would be repeatable. There's no reason why that would occur that I can think of.
I'd agree with that. Simazine is entirely root active, or it might be a little bit of leaf absorption is there with simazine, but basically it's a soil active sort of product.
Yeah. This might, so just following on from Paul's question about oversowing with annual ryegrass into silvergrass pasture, does the simazine take out the silvergrass but leave the oversown ryegrass?
No, we've controlled the silvergrass the year before. In my case, sorry, I'll just go with me first, Tim, sorry. Yep. We've controlled the silvergrass the year before. We're not doing it in the same year. Got me? So we've got to the middle of the winter, say the year before, or early winter the year before. We've controlled our silvergrass. We've probably had a reasonable clover year. The next year we go in with the annual ryegrass. So the simazine effect by then is zilch.
Yep, spot on.
Great.
Yeah, simazine, like the simazine's quite as a chemical is quite. 1 or 2 leaf ryegrass, it would knock out quite quickly, I'd say. So definitely what Jim, it's all the year before.
You wouldn't do it in the same. I wouldn't do it in the same year. No.
Never.
Nicked.
Thanks for the question, Paul. The next one for you, Tim, from Graham. Have you tested Sakura? Sorry, I've said that wrong, but let's just go with that. Sakura or Boxer Gold as a pre-season application in Phalaris for annual grass control?
Pre-season, pre-emergency talking or post?
He says pre-season. Graham, if you just want to clarify that, probably looks pre-emergent, but...
So it's already a Phalaris pasture. We haven't quite got to the break.
It's pre-emergent.
Would you spray Sakura on or not? Is that the question?
Yes. Or Boxer Gold.
Yeah, that might be your territory. I don't think
it not really is my territory, but I think Sakura would be too expensive. I'm not sure what it would do to the legumes, though. I don't think they'd be very happy with the Sakura, I thought. So I'm not 100%. It's not a look. Again, we're sort of like pasture agronomists. We don't use Sakura, so I don't know, but I don't think I'd be going there. If there's a good crop agronomist on who gets into this crap, just in this stuff. Sorry, my mistake. That's a 2-1. That's a 2-1 comment. Sorry about that. If it gets into this stuff, just text in your not text. You know what I mean. Just message box in your answer for Hillary, but I don't know the answer to that.
Yes.
I wouldn't do it.
Can we ask Graham why would he want to use Sakura or Boxer Gold as a pre-emergent? What's the story there?
Yep. So Graham's just followed up with a few statements. He said that Sakura is okay on legumes and is registered in a range of crop legumes. And he's asking the question because it will control Volpia.
I'm not sure what, I mean, look, we don't know what it'll do to, we don't know what it will do to the Phalaris, and that would be one thing. I thought there was a hefty plant back on Lucerne though, on Sakura. I'm just looking at the label. Could be an oldish label, but yeah, subterranean clover has a minimum recropping interval of 9 months. So on subs, so I'm not sure. I'm sorry, I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. There you go. 21 months on Lucerne and Medics. So that's so maybe this is an old label. I don't know, but I don't think that I would be doing that.
Yep. So obviously, if it's registered for a range of crop legumes, that doesn't correspond to pasture legumes, by the sounds of that.
Appears to be. I don't know enough about it. I'm quite happy to say I don't know enough about it. Propizamide is another one that some people are talking about as a an application pre-emergent in a Phalaris pasture for grass weeds, but once again, you're way off the label, and I'd want to see some pretty sturdy data before I walk down that road.
Well, I think people do get a bit carried away with all these U-Butte sort of herbicides that potentially can do this and do that, and I reckon you need to really come back and focus on what Jim said at the start. Why is there a weed issue to start with, and why are they there, and what are the competing? What competition is there? What's the soil fertility like, and why has the pasture got to the state that it's in? And often, I think that's often where the answers lie, rather than sort of taking the nuking approach with some new herbicide that's being released somewhere. It's cost a lot of money.
Thanks, Tim. This one, I've actually just been emailed this outside of the webinar platform for Jim. What environment and summer rainfall plant pattern is Jim planting a brassica in spring? Just clarifying, is there perennial ryegrass with the brassica?
I think that's actually Tim, not Jim.
Sorry, go Tim. Yep.
Yeah, this is, we're talking Mediterranean type rainfall. So summer dry, but with it's an area that will get rains in November. But I mean, that particular year there was reasonable rain, the reasonable spring rains in sort of November, which was good. But we get dry summers. But I've seen brassicas do really well. Just provide with no spring rain whatsoever. Put them in September, and maybe 10 or 15 mil, and that's it. And until the following year. As if you've got good weed control, and you've got, and the other secret is to get them sprayed out early enough so that you don't spray your weeds out in September. Like if you go, I'd rather go into August, so you've got a month or so fallow, and you've got some winter rainfall storage happening, and enough moisture there, and obviously the paddocks then are direct drilled and drilled with a disc drill, so there's very little soil disturbance, and I've seen it work really well.
Just to add to that, actually, we do that in parts of southern New South Wales. They tend to be higher rainfall parts, or some are dominant parts over on the Monero. Certainly, up on the Tumbarumba Plateau, and late winter through to not quite mid-spring, but early spring, sowing of grazing brassica will do quite well. So that is a possibility, sure. Once and of course, I have clients in southern Victoria who do that sort of thing too. Once, however, you come down off those heights in terms of rainfall, and you get warmer summers, all bets are off, basically. So if you tried that at Wagga, then you'd just be in, I don't know, 8 years, maybe 9 years out of 10, you'd be just throwing your money away. So it just depends on sort of where you are. But I think a lower temperature, probably you're looking at, I don't know, 750, 800 mils and above type rainfall. Then maybe you could have a look at it.
We're probably 650 and above, but we're relatively close to the coast. So I take your point there, Jim.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm just saying, just to expand on what Tim's saying, because we don't know where the question's actually coming from geographically. That's all.
Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, Paul's back with his question about oversowing annual ryegrass into silvergrass. What if the simazine application was later, for example, August, in an autumn oversow? Yeah.
No, I wouldn't touch it. Sorry. I don't think it's well enough established to take simazine.
So sorry. So you're saying we've oversowed in autumn, and would we put on simazine afterwards? Is that the question? Sorry, I'm not quite get it.
Yeah,
is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, I think I'm with Tim on that. I think I'd probably pull the pin on that one. So in other words, what you have to do to avoid that situation is you have to actually make sure you've done really good silvergrass control the year before. That's what you've got to do there.
But I guess I know always get people get caught, and I think in that situation you're probably looking at a spray topping in spring, and try and get the timing right. And if you've put clover in there as well and you want it to maximise seed set, then it's a spray topping with gramoxone. So that could be worth a go. Otherwise, there's nothing wrong with just good old-fashioned hard grazing in spring, especially on let the silvergrass run up to head, and then not dry, but just let it get some, even if it's in the boot stage, and then just give it a really hard flogging. I think we overlook grazing a bit in spring as a pasture management tool, and we tend not to graze our pastures hard enough. And I wouldn't be afraid to, if a pasture's got a bit weedy in early spring, we'll give it a flogging.
I concur. Give it a plug.
Good.
Grows it harder, everyone. So that looks like we've got one more question for the evening, and that looks like that's all that's come through. If you do have a quick one to finish up, send it through now. This one from Melanie. How often can you use simazine in the same paddock?
Oh, that's
Never.
yeah. That's look. I was just looking at a bit of information before today. Um, it depends where that question's coming from. If it's coming from a herbicide resistance, it takes quite a while to get resistance to group C's. I'm not saying that we don't have resistance to group C's, we do, but they're not as much as we do with other group herbicides. But I think it raises, before I try, and I can't really answer the question, because if it's coming from, I don't know quite where it's coming from, but it does raise an interesting point that we really haven't touched on tonight, and that is, I think, I mean, maybe I've got this wrong, but if I looked over the last 30 years, I think pasture or livestock production people are probably doing more with pastures, with grazing brassicas and all sorts of things, right? They're probably doing more with herbicides than they've ever done. And we really do need to be mindful of the limitations with respect to herbicide resistance. I have quite a number of clients who have lucerne, and we will use group A herbicides to clean our grasses from time to time for various reasons. We have to be very aware of that as an issue. It is not something that occurs to other people. You have a certain number of shots on a paddock before you start selecting, de facto for herbicide tolerant types. So we've got to be really mindful of that when you start doing that. Having said that, I would have thought simazine, atrazine, a whole lot of other group C's, fairly safe. You've got quite a few shots before that's an issue. I'm wondering if the question is about residues, and I have to admit I wouldn't know the answer. So you mean, but I would say if you're having to use simazine often on a paddock, we go back to slide 1 almost and say the problem is the system, right? I mean, I'm not trying to evade the question, but if we're having to do it really often, then we're doing something else wrong. That would be my answer. Often,
Right.
Once every 2 to 3 years, that's just too much. We're doing something else wrong.
Yep. And of course, the old adage with herbicides is, if you're onto a good thing, well, don't stick with it. Yeah.
All right, well, that's it for the questions tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this evening. Sorry about a few of the technical issues early on, but lucky we had Jim and Tim to clean it up for us. So thank you very much, Jim and Tim, for logging on and answering those questions and sharing your experience with winter cleaning. If you are wanting to listen to these webinars, they are recorded and are available on the MLA website. And that's all for us this evening. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah. Thanks, Hillary. Yeah. Thank you, listeners.